Namaste, Magic the Gathering homies. This is Navanad here with the Deck Tech Primer for you. Finally, as promised, we're going to take a pretty deep dive into Marwyn Elf Storm. People wanted to see a $100 budget competitive elf build, elf ball build, and this is pretty much that. This deck is intricate. It's pretty crazy. There's lots and lots to know, lots and lots to go through. I could spend, honestly, I have spent 40 minutes going over this deck. And still really just scratched the surface. Deleted that. This is like take 2, and we're going to try to get through as much as we can in a reasonable amount of time. But just keep in mind, and I think this is going to be the secret to learning and understanding this deck without me having to explain it over 47 minutes or something, is that even though there's so many A plus B plus C combos, we're not really doing like a symbol of Thassa's Oracle with Demonic Consultation or a Dualcaster Mage Twin Flame. We don't need exactly 2 pieces that win the game. We're not looking for a, ad nauseum, draw half our deck, and then win with some weird combo that way. We are looking for combinations of cards that create certain board states. And one of the things we're trying to do with the deck is we're trying to generate infinite mana. The way we're generally going to be doing that is with a big mana dork like we've got in the command zone, but is not limited to the command zone. We've got Marwyn in the command zone. She taps for mana equal to her power, and every time you drop an elf, which you might have noticed, the deck is just jam-packed full of elves, she gets bigger and bigger, which makes her tap for more and more mana. So she is what I'm going to call a big mana dork. We're looking for a big mana dork. There's redundancy in the deck, which is nice because if your Marwyn gets murdered 4 times and you can't cast her anymore, you can still win the game, which is an advantage over, say, like a Selvala. Also, we don't have to play all the crappy cards like a 8/8 trample for 3 mana that has cumulative upkeep, punch yourself in the face. We can just play good cards or decent cards, like genuinely decent cards, and not have to worry about all the draft chaff that doesn't do anything when Selvala is not in play. In fact, we can play multiple copies of, quote, Selvala. We've got Archfiend. No, that's not right. Elvish Archdruid. We've got Karametra's Acolyte, Priest of Titania. And, we're usually going to use Marwyn because she's in the command zone, but we have redundancy is the point. So this is what I'm going to be calling a big mana dork. A Marwyn on 6, or a Marwyn that you've hit with a, you've cast Marwyn on turn 2, which is the game plan. You normally want to be you always want to put Marwyn down on turn 2. That's like Mulligan 101, find your Marwyn on turn 2, or take a Mulligan. Even if you're going down to like 5 cards, you're going to keep doing that. Maybe if you're deciding on a 5, if you've got a 5-card hand that gets Marwyn out on 3 and has all the other things that you need, maybe you keep the hand. But generally, we want Marwyn on 2, which is actually pretty easy to do in the deck. But we're going to want, for any of our infinite mana combos, a big mana dork and a way to untap it. That's the thing. That's what we're looking for. And then, of course, we're going to need a payoff for that. So if we have Marwyn, or let's say Karametra's Acolyte with a bunch of green things in play, which is typically what's going to happen, or even if we have Marwyn on 1 and we invigorate it or scale up, now our Marwyn's going to tap for 6 mana, which is going to be enough to perform all the combos in the deck. So what are the combos in the deck? So your A plan, we're just going to go straight to the combos because that's what you really need to understand how to play the deck. And then in kind of a part 2, I'm going to do just a list of play hands. We're going to play things out. We're going to work through things, but I want you to get the basics, and the basics are not that basic. So here we go. Ashaya, Soul of the Wild, is also kind of the soul of the deck. I would recommend if you're going to learn one combo and really get your head around it first, it's got to be the Ashaya combos. Ashaya is going to combo with Quirion Ranger and Scrib Ranger primarily. So you need Ashaya, Quirion Ranger, and Ashaya. Quirion Ranger, where did it go? Good lord. Here. Or you won't need both, but you need one of the Rangers. The other one is Scrib Ranger, preferably Quirion Ranger, because number 1, it's an elf, which will keep buffing your Marwyn, and number 2, it only costs 1 mana, so the mana requirements are easier no matter what big mana dork we're using. So let us say that we have got Marwyn, Ashaya, and Quirion Ranger in play. Quirion Ranger has the ability to return a forest you control to your hand to untap a dork. In this case, we're going to be untapping our big mana dork. So we've got let's just say Marwyn is set to tap for 4 mana. Ashaya has the text, non-token creatures you control are forests in addition to their other types. So remember, we can return a forest we control to our hand 1 time per turn with Quirion Ranger to untap one of our big mana dorks. Well, if Quirion Ranger is a forest, and Ashaya says she is, then we can use Quirion Ranger's ability to return Quirion Ranger to our hand to untap Marwyn or whatever big mana dork. We can tap Marwyn for whatever amount of mana. We can use that mana to recast Quirion Ranger. And by the way, since Quirion Ranger is an elf, it's going to make Marwyn bigger, which is going to make her tap for more mana. Now, usually you can only use Quirion Ranger once per turn. But because we're bouncing it to our hand and recasting it, the game is going to recognize that as a unique or new game piece, a new entity, and we're going to be able to use that ability over and over. So we're just going to be bouncing an untapper back to our hand to untap a big mana dork. That's the big combo. That's what you're looking for in all of the combos, I should say. Some other ways to do that. We have Temur Sabertooth and Kogla. We have a bunch of dorks, and we have a bunch of ways to untap dorks. So let's say, just for example, we've got either our Temur Sabertooth or our Kogla, and we've got any of our big mana dorks. We'll just keep using Marwyn. That's when you're going to have the most often. So let's say we've got Marwyn in play. She's tapping for, who cares, 6 mana. Not hard to do, by the way. She's tapping for 6 mana. Temur Sabertooth is in play, and we've got Hyrax Tower Scout. Or if we don't have Temur, we could have Kogla. And Kogla can do the same thing as Temur when it comes to Hyrax Tower Scout or Eternal Witness. We're not going to get too much into the weeds with Ewit. Ewit gets complicated. I blew a lot of time on explaining Ewit loops in the last take. But Hyrax Tower Scout's a human. Kogla can bounce humans. When you cast Hyrax Tower Scout, it untaps your big mana dork. You can tap your big mana dork to generate enough mana to return your Hyrax Tower Scout to your hand with either your Temur Sabertooth or your Kogla. Rinse, repeat. Congratulations, you've reached infinite mana. Great Oak Guardian is another way to do the same thing. Now this one doesn't work with Kogla because it isn't a human. But the nice thing about Great Oak Guardian is, even though you do need Temur specifically to bounce it to your hand, you don't have to be able to pay the full 6 mana with Marwyn or whatever your big mana dork is, because it actually, when it comes into play, it untaps all of your dorks. So as long as you've got enough dorks in play, and especially if one of them is Marwyn, you can tap the dorks, cast your Great Oak Guardian. It untaps all of your dorks and gives them +2/+2. Now that also buffs up Marwyn, making her tap for extra mana. So even if you just break even on the first iteration, every additional iteration you're going to start netting mana, because Marwyn's getting bigger and bigger, meaning she's going to make more and more mana as you're returning Great Oak Guardian to your hand and recasting it. And the nice other thing about Great Oak Guardian is it's going to buff your entire team while you're going through the loop, so you don't necessarily need a payoff for the mana. You're making infinite mana and assembling your win condition all in kind of one combo. Other ways to pay off your infinite mana loops, because remember, our infinite mana loops are going to involve returning a creature to our hand, recasting the creature in such a way that is going to untap a big mana dork. Fuck it, we'll talk about the Temur Sabertooth Ewit just a little bit in this one little line. If we have Temur Sabertooth and Eternal Witness and a big mana dork, then we can return the Eternal Witness to our hand and cast it again, and we can pick up one of our untap effects. We've got Vitalize, we've got Boon of Boseiju, so we can continuously so we're going to cast our Ewit, return Boon of Boseiju to our hand. We're going to cast Boon of Boseiju on our Marwyn, untapping it and giving it a pump. We're going to tap it. We're going to use the mana that we get from our Marwyn to return the Eternal Witness to hand and cast it again, and pick up the untapper out of the graveyard and cast it again, so on and so forth, rinse and repeat. Other ways to pay off, because again, we're always bouncing and replaying. So anything that's going to allow us to draw a card when we're bouncing and replaying our untappers, like Beast Whisper, we get Beast Whisper into play, then all of these loops are going to allow us to draw our deck, draw as many cards as we need, maybe put a whole bunch of creatures into play. There's a billion ways to win the game when you have your deck in your hand. Leaf Crown Visionary can do the same thing if you're making infinite mana and you're, say, going through the Ashaya and Quirion Ranger loop. Then every time you play your Quirion Ranger, which is an elf, you can trigger your Leaf Crown Visionary, draw a card, so you're drawing your deck. Not too difficult to win the game when you've got your deck in your hand. Any way to get all of your creatures in play will win the game, even if your creatures have Summoning Sickness, which generally they will, because I thought of that. We've got Crashing Drawbridge and Destiny Spinner. We've got if we draw our deck, we know we'll necessarily draw all of our creatures and our Crashing Drawbridge. We can play all of our creatures out, including the Crashing Drawbridge. Now the Drawbridge still does have Summoning Sickness, so we need to get rid of the Summoning Sickness. But if we're using Ashaya with our infinite mana loop, and I'd say usually we are, then we can use Destiny Spinner to give Crashing Drawbridge haste. Now that's kind of freaking weird, right? But just read the card text. There's a little bit below the normally known part of Destiny Spinner that says for 4 mana, target land becomes, well, whatever, it gets haste. And Ashaya says that your creatures are lands. Well, Drawbridge is a creature, so now Drawbridge is a land. We play the Destiny Spinner, play out all of our creatures. We tap 4 mana to give Crashing Drawbridge haste. We tap the Crashing Drawbridge because, remember, it's a land. We can use the Destiny Spinner ability to give it haste. We slam the Drawbridge and delete all of our opponents simultaneously. If you ever get to, I'm not going to go into this, but if you ever get to have Glimpse of Nature and Heritage Druid going at the same time while you're playing this deck, you will immediately realize why this combo was banned out of Modern. It is busted. It's too complicated. We're not going to get into it. There's another really complicated line. I think it'll probably come up in some of the test hands we do in the next video that are going to involve Wirewood Symbiote. Just real quickly, if we have a big mana dork, Wirewood Symbiote, Temur Sabertooth, and any other elf, and we're going to have an elf. So let's say we have a Findhorn Elf, Wirewood Symbiote, Temur Sabertooth, and a Priest of Titania that's tapping for 5 or 6, whatever, doesn't matter. We have a Priest of Titania tapping for a bunch of mana, Wirewood Symbiote, Temur Sabertooth. We can tap Priest of Titania for 1 billion mana, however much mana, 6 mana. Once we've tapped it, we can activate Wirewood Symbiote's ability by returning Findhorn Elves to our hand. We can only do this one time per turn. Priest of Titania untaps. Then we can tap Priest of Titania again to add a bunch more mana. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use part of that mana to use Temur Sabertooth to return Wirewood Symbiote to our hand. Then we're going to recast Wirewood Symbiote. Now the game, again, is going to recognize that as a new game piece, so you can activate that ability again. Oh, but we already bounced our elf. Well, but we just tapped our Priest of Titania for 5, 6, 7 mana. So we're going to use some of that mana to play our Findhorn Elf back out. So what's the count here? We need 1, 2 mana to play our Findhorn and our Wirewood over and over. So we'll need to net 2 there. We'll need to net 2 mana to bounce the Wirewood Symbiote. Bouncing the Findhorn Elf with the Symbiote doesn't cost mana, so we need 2 mana to bounce the Wirewood. We can bounce the Findhorn for free to untap the Elf. And we need 1 mana to cast the Wirewood. So we need 1, 2, 3, and then 1 to cast the Elf. 4. So if we can generate 4 mana, if we can tap Priest of Titania for 4 mana, this will go mana neutral, which means if we have one of our draw effects in play, we can probably win the game because we're going to draw our deck. It's pretty easy to win the game when you draw your deck, but technically if you can tap this for 5 mana, or tap your Acolyte for 5 mana, or tap your Druid, what is it called? The Elf Druid thingamabobber, Elvish Archdruid. If you can tap that for, if you can tap any of these dorks for 5 mana, you can continuously go through the loop and make infinite mana. In fact, Marwyn doesn't even have to start tapping for 5 mana because as you're bouncing the elves, you're going to be buffing her and making her produce more mana. Now we're going to skip. Now there's tons and tons and tons more lines. I think you're just going to have to either watch me go through some of them in the next video or discover them on your own. This deck is like a universe full of craziness and nonsense to get into. The more you play it, the better you're going to get at it. The skill ceiling is just, well, through the roof. The skill ceiling is through the roof. It's going to get as good as you are at winning the game. I've been very impressed with it. I've been mulliganing the deck a lot, goldfishing it a lot. Now, I do mean that I'm doing this without opponents, just in Mox Field, and I've been honestly shocked by the number of turn 3 win attempts. Turn 3 wins, goldfishing turn 3 wins, of course, with no opponents trying to stop me, with a $100 deck. I mean, I think it's actually a little bit crazy, but turn 4 is a little bit more normal. But the turn 3 are not that uncommon, and sometimes it takes till turn 5, but generally you're going to be looking to win the game on turn 4 or try to win the game on turn 4 with this deck, and it will do so very consistently once you learn the lines and you understand what you're trying to accomplish and how to mulligan, and you're going to want to mulligan fairly aggressively. Alright, so infinite mana, numbers, whatever and whatever. Staff of Domination and Umbra Mantle. So these are really one-card combinations, like one-card win cons with your commander. But they're hard to find. In fact, you can't. You have to draw into them. Now, you do have a lot of ways to draw a ton of cards. Probably not going to be able to go through a lot of that in the video. Let's just say if you pump a guy really big and you have your deck loaded full of effects that say draw cards equal to the biggest creature you control, then you're going to be able to string those together and draw a ton of cards, especially if you're making infinite mana and you've got like a 9/9 Ashaya and you're making your Marwyn a 12/12 or whatever. But we're going to usually have to draw into, either naturally or by stringing draw effects together, we're going to need to draw into Staff of Domination or Umbra Mantle. But if we're lucky enough to get one of these, they're the easiest combo. It's just one card and it's pretty straightforward and simple. So with Staff of Domination, you're going to use your big mana elf. You're going to tap it for big mana. Then you're going to tap 3 mana to untap the big mana elf. So let's say you can tap your Marwyn for 6 mana. You tap it for 6 mana, which is not at all hard to do in the deck. Then you're going to pay 3 of that 6 to untap it with the staff. So you're floating 3 mana. Then you're going to tap it again for 6. Now you've got 9 mana. You're going to pay 1 mana to untap the staff. Now you're at 8. You're going to tap your Marwyn, or you're going to tap 3 mana. Now you're at 5 to untap the Marwyn and tap it again, and so on and so forth until you make infinite mana. Then once you achieve infinite mana, the Staff of Domination is not only the infinite mana combo, but also the outlet for the combo, because you can use the 5 mana effect to activate the staff and draw a card, use your infinite mana to untap the staff, and tap 5 again to draw a card, tap 1 to untap it. You can draw through your list, put all your creatures into play, win the game that way. And here if we're drawing through our deck, we're going to find our Swiftfoot Boots, and we're going to find our Crashing Drawbridge and all of our creatures. We play all of our creatures out, we play the Crashing Drawbridge. We equip Swiftfoot Boots to the Drawbridge. That gives the Drawbridge haste. Once we have all of our dudes in play, we slam the Drawbridge and slam the game on all of our opponents, deleting them in simultaneously. Umbral Mantle is kind of similar to Staff of Domination. You can even more easily go off with Umbral Mantle, like in terms of how much mana Marwyn has to be able to produce. Marwyn can be a 1/1, and if you have just a few extra mana laying around, you're going to be able to get there with just the Umbral Mantle. So if you've got Umbral Mantle in play, you've got Marwyn, she's not summoning sick, she's a 1/1. If you have 3 mana, you can tap 3 mana, because remember, Umbral Mantle equips for 0. You pay 3 mana, so you're going to first tap Marwyn for 1 mana, because she's only a 1/1. Then you're going to use 3 mana, so I guess you actually only needed 2 other mana. You're going to tap the 3 mana to untap Marwyn with the Umbral Mantle, making her a 3/3 instead of a 1/1. So now she can tap for 3 mana. And if she can tap for 3 mana, she can activate the staff with her own mana ability. So it costs 3 to activate the staff. So if she's a 3/3, you tap her for 3. You use the 3 mana to untap her with this Umbral Mantle, giving her +2/+2. Now she's a 5/5. So now when she taps, she makes 5 mana, and you can put 3 of that mana into untapping her, giving her +2/+2 again, over and over and over. sorry about that, over and over and over until you have made an enormous, big, beefy Marwyn. And the really cool thing is then you can pass the staff around. I keep saying staff, the umbral mantle around to all of your other creatures, as long as they have a tap ability, and most of the creatures in this deck do, because you can't just like tap your Beast Whisperer because you feel like it. So that means you wouldn't be able to infinitely use the umbral mantle's untap ability. But Llanowar elves, Fentorn elves, Elvish Mystic, all these, most of these things, you tap your Fentorn elf for a green, you use your infinite mana to use the umbral mantle to untap the Fentorn elf, giving it +2/+2. You do that a billion times, and you make a 1,000,000,000 very angry elf. And then you pass it over to the next elf, and the next dude, and the next dude, and you make an infinitely large army. So what are some other ways to pay off infinite mana? Basically, we want to infinitely buff our team. The very most straightforward, easiest way to do that is going to be with Azuri Renegade Leader. So as a new player to this deck, you might focus on Azuri. If you make infinite mana, you've got a few guys out, you can use the 5 mana ability to give all of your creatures +3/+3 and trample over and over and over until they're all 1,000,000,000s with trample. Swing in, make all of your opponents very, very dead. So those are the main ideas in the deck. Duskwatch Recruiter's an outlet. Anything that's going to allow you to draw a card. If you can untap Isan, the Wanderer Bard, over and over, you can use that as an outlet. If you can recast your Eternal Witness to find a draw spell, or if you can, let's say you have let's say you don't have Eternal Witness in play. You've got an Eldritch Evolution or some other tutor. You've got a Summoner's Pact in your hand. You don't have an Ewit, but you do have infinite mana and a Temur Sabertooth. You're just looking for a way to kill all your opponents. You can use the Summoner's Pact to find the Eternal Witness. Then you cast the Eternal Witness, and you get back your Summoner's Pact. Then you use Temur Sabertooth to bounce Eternal Witness back to your hand. You cast it again, but before that you cast the Summoner's Pact, finding whatever creature you want. So you are alternating casting the Summoner's Pact. So you first Summoner's Pact for Ewit. Then you're going to cast the Ewit and get the Summoner's Pact back to your hand. You're going to cast Summoner's Pact to find whatever creature you want. You're going to cast that creature. Then you're going to bounce Eternal Witness to your hand. You're going to play it again, returning Summoner's Pact to your hand. Then you're going to cast the Summoner's Pact again and find whatever other creature you want. And this is another way to fill your board with creatures. If you have infinite mana, you can get to a point where you can, if you can infinitely tutor creatures, or you can infinitely draw cards, or you can infinitely put your dudes into play by drawing your creature cards with Duskwatch Recruiter over and over and then putting them into play. You will come to a way to create a winning game state. And I don't think we're going to get too much further in the weeds for right now. I think as a real quick tutorial primer, that's going to do it. And then we're going to move on to a second part of the Marwyn primer, which is going to be just running out test hands. And I think you'll get a better feel for exactly what I'm talking about as we start running through test hands in part 2 of the Marwyn primer. But that's going to do it for part 1 of the Marwyn primer. Hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time, namaste, world to your mothers. May the force be with you. East side till I die. Peace, and so on. Later. So we have a starting hand.